Welcome to the Banner of Truth magazine podcast, where each week we bring you selected content from the magazine for your encouragement and edification. Arnold Dallimore. The name has been closely associated with the Banner of Truth since the 1970s, when the first volume of his celebrated biography of George Whitefield came out. After the completion of the Whitefield biography, he went on to publish The Life of Edward Irving and Spurgeon, a biography, with the Trust, as well as A Heart Set Free, The Life of Charles Wesley, and finally, Susanna Wesley, the mother of John and Charles Wesley. So much for the books, but what of the man behind the books? Who was Arnold Dallimore? To answer that question, we will interlace 3 different magazine articles, which provide much helpful detail on Dallimore's origins, his faith, the woman who became his much-loved wife, his highs and lows in the ministry, and of course, his writing. Our 2 chief sources will be Hugh Clary's Remembering Arnold and May Dallimore, which appeared in issue 621 of the magazine, June 2015, and Michael Haykin's Remembering Arnold Dallimore and His Books, published in the August to September 2022 issue of the magazine. Let's turn first to Dr. Haykin's account. Arnold Dallimore was born in London, Ontario, in September 1911 to Christian parents who had emigrated to Canada from England. His father, Arthur Dallimore, had come from a poor, unbelieving home in London, England, but he had been saved at Arthur Street Baptist Church in his mid-teens. Arnold's mother, Mabel Buckingham, came from very different circumstances. Her father, William Buckingham, was a builder and spent his life rebuilding gentlemen's mansions. Mabel Buckingham thus grew up in a solid middle-class home. Her father was also an Anglican evangelical who frequently attended the deservedly famous ministry of Charles Haddon Spurgeon. And thus, Arnold's mother was taken to hear the great Baptist preacher from the age of 7 onwards. She was too young to take much in, but long remembered the huge numbers of people that attended Spurgeon's Metropolitan Tabernacle and the sound of Spurgeon's voice. Arnold's parents met at Arthur Street Baptist Church and began to see one another despite the discrepancy in their social backgrounds. The Buckinghams were strongly opposed to the budding relationship, and that because of social reasons. Around 1899, Arthur Dallimore emigrated to Canada, looking for work. 7 years passed, and although Mabel Buckingham had another boyfriend, Arthur wrote to her to come out to Canada and marry him. She was then 33, and, adventurous in spirit, she agreed. She sailed from Liverpool in the spring of 1907. They were married in Maple Grove Methodist Church, near Tillsonburg, very shortly after she arrived. Arnold was their 3rd child, and by the time he was 2, his family had moved to London, to what was then a suburb known as Chelsea Green. When Dallimore reflected back in later years to the key influences on him as he grew up, he unhesitatingly thought first of his mother. As he said, "In the light of her goodness, I never had any doubts about the reality of Christianity." Initially, the family attended a Presbyterian church, but in time they began to go to Adelaide Street Baptist Church on Sunday evenings, where Anglo-Canadian Baptist preacher T.T. Shields pastored from 1904 to 1910. Shields was a profound influence on Arnold's life in later years. In the afternoons, Arnold and his sister Ruth attended a Sunday school at a nearby gospel hall. It was in that Gospel Hall Sunday school, run by the Plymouth Brethren, that Arnold realized, in his words, that I was a sinner and would be shut out of heaven unless I was saved. I learned that Jesus Christ, when he died, bore my sins, and that by believing in him, by trusting not in my own goodness, but in his sacrifice, I would be saved. He was 9 years old when God drew him to Christ, but he was not baptized till he was 13, which would have been in 1924. In 1927, when Arnold was 16, a wide division took place in the Baptist denomination in Ontario. This division was part of the larger fundamentalist modernist controversy. In Ontario, the debate centered on the teaching of L.H. Marshall, professor of practical theology at McMaster University. Marshall, it was rightly claimed, had liberal tendencies in his teaching. The controversy began in 1925 and culminated in a massive split in 1927. Leading those churches that were expelled from the Baptist Convention was T.T. Shields. To some extent, Shields' strong personality, which could at times be what Dallimore later termed domineering, was also part of the controversy. Arnold Dallimore's father had been an early subscriber to Shields' Gospel Witness, a weekly paper put out by Shields Church, Jarvis Street Baptist Church in Toronto. In this weekly, Shields discussed, among other things, matters dealing with the controversy. Thus, the controversy was regularly discussed in the Dallimore household. Arthur Dallimore was a firm supporter of Shields, and so when the split came, the Dallimores left Adelaide Street Baptist Church for a new London work. This new work was pastored by James McGinley, a young man who had been saved under Shields' preaching and baptized by him. McGinley, who was a Scotsman, had extraordinary gifts as a preacher and was able to present the gospel with understanding and emotion. This church, which eventually became Central Baptist Church in London, was thronged from the very beginning, with numbers regularly professing Christ week after week. It was during this time that, Dallimore later recalled, God worked a miracle in my heart and in the hearts of my cousins, Sid and Steve Dallimore, my sister Ruth, and several other young people. There came a new and deep devotion to Christ. And 3 of us, young men, went into the London market each Saturday evening and attempted to preach the gospel. I had possessed a New Testament for some years, but had never opened it. But now it became precious to me, and I began to memorize verses and whole chapters. I soon came to the place where I was sure God was calling me to enter the ministry, and with an inner delight, I submitted to that call. So, at the age of 20, in 1931, Arnold answered the call of God to pastoral ministry and spent the next 4 years studying at Toronto Baptist Seminary, which had been founded only a few years earlier by T.T. Shields. Though he would later disagree with Shields in some areas, he was always thankful for the training he received under him. Shields gave him a love for the English language and a realization of the importance of proper diction. We'll return to Dr. Haykin's account in a little while. For now, we turn to Ian Hugh Clary's article for insight into May Breedin, who would go on to become Arnold's beloved wife. Born in Owen Sound, Ontario, in 1921, the last of Thomas and Elizabeth Breedin's 13 children, May Breedin was 10 years Arnold Dallimore's junior. Her father was a baker, and his children consisted in what she called a baker's dozen, though she also had 3 half-siblings from her dad's previous marriage to Mary Breedin, who had died. The Breedins were Anglicans, and May was received into communion at 12. Though she grew up in a happy home, she says that she was not raised to love the gospel. Through a girlfriend, May was invited to a Bible study at the home of a Mr. Eagleson, who worshipped at the Baptist Church in Orangeville, Ontario, then pastored by her future husband. Eagleson's messages always pointed you to Christ, she later wrote, and he made it plain that men and women, being sinners before God, needed to trust Jesus and accept him as their Savior. This was a different message than I had ever heard. Eventually, May attended a Sunday morning service and was struck by the strong preaching. She was converted to Christ on the 1st of July, 1941, at a special service where she heard a sermon on Ephesians 2, 8-9 and Romans 10, 9. Initially, her parents were not pleased about her conversion, as they had experienced something similar with their son Mark, who had been converted earlier and would later go on to teach at the New Brunswick Bible Institute. May was initially disinterested in the young pastor of Orangeville Baptist, although many of the single women in the church were hopeful that he would turn his eye their way. She recalled that the young girls used to tease one another about him, and I always was there with my reply, "A minister, not for me." Eventually, she warmed to Dallimore, much to his delight, and they began to get to know one another. It was originally planned that May would leave Orangeville to attend a nursing program in Guelph, Ontario. These plans were thwarted due to World War II, as many young men left Orangeville to serve overseas, and the women who remained took the vacated jobs. Instead of nursing, May moved to Toronto to attend a trade college for welding. She would often return to Orangeville, where she discovered that the friendship she had with the young minister began to get more serious. Though they were often parted, the two wrote letters back and forth, and eventually spoke of marriage. They were married on the 21st of August 1942 at Forward Baptist Church in Toronto. In March 1943, after 3 years in Orangeville, the Dallimores were called to a 2-point charge at Courtright and Wilkesport, Ontario. When they arrived at the parsonage in Courtright, it had no washroom, so Dallimore was constrained to plumb his own. Recalling that experience, May said that Courtright was a cold church, and Wilkesport, which was 14 miles away, a bitter church, though their life was generally happy at this point. This happiness would soon change with Dallimore's next pastorate. Briscoe Street Baptist Church in London, Ontario, was known by some as the pastor-killing church. Dallimore called it a ministerial graveyard, as ministers remained but a year. He lasted 13 months. When the Dallimores were first called there, they were promised a parsonage, which they did not receive. Instead, they had to live in the home of a lady, whom May said treated them poorly. She spoke of this time as a horrible experience. Dallimore's departure from the church also marked the beginning of a 3-year break from ministry. Briscoe Street did not kill Arnold Dallimore, but it drove him into depression. He started work in painting and renovation with another man from the church, and took out a $2,000 loan to buy houses, renovate them, and sell them for profit. The Dallimores, with their baby son Paul, born on the 15th of November 1947, lived in 8 houses during Dallimore's first 2 years in construction. The financial strain on the family led May to sell their wedding gifts in order to eat. During this time, her husband disappeared to New York State for 3 months on doctor's orders. She knew nothing about where he went or what he did, only that he seemed better when he returned home. Cottam, Years of Growth. In November 1949, a group of 29 people in Essex, Ontario, near Windsor, left Essex Baptist Church to form another Baptist cause. In need of a pastor, this group contacted Dallimore, still living in London, who came down to regularly preach for them. Discerning a call to return to vocational pastoral ministry, he agreed to help them plant a church in the nearby town of Cottam. The following February, Cottam Baptist Church was chartered. The Dallimores moved to Cottam on the 11th of June, 1950, a month to the day after their daughter, Linda May, was born. On the first Sunday of September 1950, Cottam Baptist held its first service. Dallimore remained at Cottam for 23 years. When asked why he went back into ministry after such bad experiences, May's answer was that he always believed he was called to ministry. The years of work in construction were not lost. The plans for the church's first construction included an apartment attached to the back of the church that became the Dallimore home for their first 8 years of ministry. Their second daughter, Cheryl, was born on the 18th of February 1955 and spent her first years there. When she was 3, the family moved to a newly bought parsonage on Talbot Street. Due to church expenses, the Dallimores' financial struggles continued, but May remembered Cottam with fondness. Their ministerial labours saw the church grow, thus the continual building projects, with a number of conversions. By the 1960s, the Sunday school had grown to nearly 250 attendees, a significant number considering the small size of the town. May was a quiet, though significant, part of the church. At this point, we return to Dr. Haykin's narrative. It was during his 23-year pastorate at Cottam Baptist Church that Dallimore began researching and writing the life of George Whitefield in earnest. It took 20 years and at least 2 trips to Great Britain before the first volume of his now classic life of Whitefield was published in 1970. Another 10 years were to follow before Volume 2 appeared. Working on the biography of Whitefield, which runs to over 1,200 pages, was a lonely task. As Dallimore recalled his experience, "I had no one with whom I could talk over the details of the task. I constantly faced the question as to whether a certain matter should be introduced in this chapter or left for a later one. As Dallimore stressed, my situation has been that of a Canadian village, at a distance from research facilities and lacking the stimulation of kindred minds and similar endeavors which academic surroundings provide." Thankfully, Dallimore made the acquaintance of one British historian, Ian H. Murray, then the editorial director of the Banner of Truth publishing house, to whom he could write about such matters. Dallimore actually wrote several drafts of the Whitefield biography and threw them out because he realized that they were unsatisfactory. And most significantly, after one trip to England and meeting with Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, the well-known Welsh pastor of the 20th century, Dallimore realized that he did not understand the doctrinal perspective of Whitefield and that he had to start rewriting the biography from square one. And at this point, we're going to read an excerpt from an article in issue 510 of the magazine, March 2006, entitled "Supporting Arnold Dallimore," which holds some interesting details on the correspondence between Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones and Arnold Dallimore in the course of the latter's writing of his Whitefield biography. When Dallimore first visited England in 1959, he had already prepared a good deal of a life of Whitefield. But that visit, further research and study which followed, and the urging of the Banner of Truth Trust led him to envisage a much larger work. In a letter to Martin Lloyd-Jones of March 14, 1963, he explained why the biography had become a long, drawn-out affair. One reason was, quote, "Upon returning from England in 1959, I scrapped what I had previously written and started afresh. At that point, in 1963, there were hopes that the first volume would be out by December 1964, the 250th anniversary of Whitfield's birth. In fact, it was not to appear till 1970. Various problems impeded the writing. One was the fact that the author was in a pastoral charge until 1973. Another that S.M. Horton, the Trust's senior advisor, set very high standards, and he and Ian Murray were particularly concerned that, in his concern to give Whitefield his true place in the evangelical revival, Arnold Dallimore verged on discrediting John Wesley's importance. On all these and other problems, the author sought Martyn Lloyd-Jones's advice, and the latter, more than once, was put into a mediating role with the Trust's editors. Happily, differences were finally settled, more or less to the satisfaction of all. The following is an example of the kind of help Martyn Lloyd-Jones gave. In 1976, when Volume 2 was in progress, Dallimore sent him some draft chapters of Volume 2 and raised particular points for his comment. Martyn Lloyd-Jones replied on December 1st, 1976. With regard to the medical questions you put to me, I fear I cannot agree with your conclusions. With regard to Whitefield, what you describe is clearly not cardiac asthma. This condition never lasts 22 years and is generally a terminal event. I have always believed that Whitefield eventually died of it, but, as you say, it could not have lasted from 1748 to 1770. What happened to him then on this occasion? The puzzling element is the vomiting of blood. That does not occur in any heart condition, and I do not recall that he had symptoms that would indicate a gastric ulcer. My suggested explanation is as follows. The pain, on breathing again, is not consistent with any heart condition, such as a coronary condition. But taking that plus the hoarseness and strained throat which he describes, I come to the conclusion that he must have had a burst blood vessel in his throat, that he swallowed the blood and then vomited it again. Then, having rested himself and having refrained from preaching, this recovered, and so he was able to go on preaching for over 22 years. I remember how this kind of thing happened to the great tenor Caruso, who frequently tended to strain himself and his throat while singing. It was that eventually led to his death. And there, of course, we have in evidence the doctor's medical background coming to the fore in his advice to Arnold Dallimore. To see how Dallimore handled this advice and used the information, see his Whitefield, Volume 2, page 253. The article goes on a little later to say the following. The correspondence between Dallimore and Martyn Lloyd-Jones indicates the immense labor involved in taking on such a major biography. As the work went on, it grew, and anticipated finishing dates were to be changed many times. Martyn Lloyd-Jones well understood the difficulty of combining a pastoral charge with authorship. He commented to Dallimore in a letter of August 28, 1968, I am glad you confirm the wisdom of my retiring from Westminster Chapel. What really finally decided me to do this was the feeling that I should bring out, in book form, some of the material I have gathered during the years, and especially what I have tried to do on the Epistle to the Romans. As Lloyd-Jones settled down to more desk work, it was his turn to receive encouragement from his Canadian correspondent. In a letter of April 30, 1973, he replied to Dallimore, It was very good indeed of you to write in this way. It not only warmed my heart, but encourages me in bringing out these books, which I find to be a considerable weariness to the flesh. Reading these letters now, we can be thankful that both men sacrificed themselves to enrich the church with books of enduring value. But let's go back to Dallimore and his work on his biography of George Whitefield. The work was not without its discouragements. Let's consider how Dr. Haykin describes these. Dallimore worked on the first volume of his Whitefield biography for so long that a number of his fellow pastors felt that the whole matter would never amount to much. Some of his church members also failed to see the importance of his literary work. After the publication of the first volume, and as Dallimore was preparing to begin to do the second volume, one of the Cottam members, who, Dallimore said, had become old and odd in his ways, said to him angrily, "You've written one book, and now you're going to write another. We're paying you $75 a week, and we ain't getting our money's worth." Yet, Dallimore stayed the course, and finally finished in 1979 his 2-volume work on Whitefield. As Lloyd-Jones had noted in his foreword to the first volume, justice has at last been done to Whitefield. Dallimore's goal in writing these 2 volumes was not simply to record history, but, as he noted, even as the ministry of Whitefield was used in setting men on fire for God, so may the story of that life be used today. Indeed, by the grace of God, Dallimore's biography of Whitefield has had literally an enormous impact on the worldwide church. Dallimore died on the 20th of March 1998. A longtime friend, Hal McBain, gave the eulogy at his funeral on the 24th of March, in which he spoke of his long and deep friendship with Dallimore. He was the soul of kindness and a gracious gentleman at all times. He was a great conversationalist. It was never dull when Arnold was in the company. Hal stressed that Dallimore will probably be best remembered as a writer, a great man who has made a tremendous contribution to the Lord's work. Indeed, when the Canadian newspaper, The Christian Week, wrote up an account of Dr. Dallimore's literary career a few years ago, they subtitled their story, "A small-town pastor's plodding research has produced one of the great biographical studies of our time." They were referring, of course, to Dallimore's 2-volume Life of Whitefield. The word plodding, though, calls to mind another 18th century figure, the self-confessed plodder William Carey. Like Carey the plodder, Dallimore's plodding has borne a rich, rich harvest for his Lord. Thank you for listening to the Banner of Truth magazine podcast. To subscribe to the magazine in print or digital formats, or both, see the show notes or visit banneroftruth.org.